Hello out there, we're on the air, it's hockey night tonight.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Light and Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve, as always, and we've got a lot to get to today. Just two things kind of off the top that we wanted to talk about before we got into anything. As I'm sure many of you guys know who are watching this, there was a very scary incident in the St. Louis Blues Anaheim Ducks game the other night where St. Louis Blues defenseman Jay Bouwmeester suffered what is being called by Doug Armstrong as a cardiac episode. He said that there was defibrillators involved. They needed to revive and stabilize Jay Bouwmeester. They stopped the game, I believe it was with 7 minutes, 17 seconds left in the first period, and that game is postponed. The NHL is going to reschedule that. We got some good updates today from Doug Armstrong. No, he said that Jay is awake, alert. He's texting his teammates. He can move all his extremities, and they're doing tests to kind of find out why this has happened. And we just want to send our best wishes to Jay Bouwmeester. It's never an easy thing when something like this happens. It's scary. I mean, we've, in a weird way, it's good that we've seen this kind of thing before because we know the NHL knows how to handle it. We've seen it with Yuri Fisher in Detroit, Rich Peverley in Dallas. Obviously, you never want to have something like this happen, but we've seen that the NHL has absolutely world-class medical staff who know exactly what to do in this type of situation, and it's a very scary thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts about the situation.
I mean, no, I think that's pretty much covers it. It was scary. I mean, they did the right thing by postponing a game because nobody wants to play after that. I mean, your teammate practically dies on the bench. Like, nobody wants to play a game after that. So it's wild. It's just really, really wild because these guys go through so much medical testing that, like, the fact that they miss things like that, not that it's anybody's fault, just like that these things like this can fly under the radar. It's really, I mean, it's scary. You saw like Chris Letang with the stroke. I mean, like, that one almost undetected. The only reason they even figured out why or what had happened was because his mom was on the trip and she's a nurse, and all the symptoms he was complaining of, she was like, you should see a doctor. And it's like, oh, he had a stroke. It's like, so, I mean, we wish Jay all the best. Hoping to see him recover. I mean, if he doesn't play again this season, makes sense. I mean, your health comes first. He does, I'm assuming, have a family of some kind, either whether it be a wife or a wife and children. So, they come first and your health comes first. You want to, first and foremost, he's a person, and then, then he is a hockey player. So it'd be nice to see him play again, but if it's at risk to his health, there's no reason to force yourself back.
Yeah, so I know we speak for almost or I can almost say with 100% certainty that we speak for all hockey fans when we say that we wish Jay Bouwmeester nothing but the best, and we hope to hear more positive news regarding him. And then to kind of balance that out a little bit, some happy news tonight. The Sedins are having their jersey retirement ceremony in Vancouver. We've had the pleasure, me and you, of when we first started really getting serious with hockey, seeing these guys, towards maybe the end of their career, but just being elite level players for the Vancouver Canucks for several years. And I in my opinion, I think this is well deserved.
Yeah, I mean, they retired 2 years ago. If you ask me, they waited a little too long. It should have been almost like instantaneous, but I mean, it's well earned, right? Like, if you think of the Vancouver Canucks, you think of Trevor Linden,
probably Marcus
Naslund, the Sedins, and maybe Roberto Luongo. Like, there's a Mount Rushmore for Vancouver Canucks greats. It's the Sedins are first and foremost probably on everybody's list. I mean, it's a shame they never got to win a Stanley Cup in their illustrious careers. I mean, but that doesn't take away from the fact that these guys are absolute talents. I mean, first ballot Hall of Famers, just all around good people, good for the organization, good for their communities, great hockey players. I mean, two of the greatest Swedish players to ever play in the NHL, without a question.
Oh yeah, and it's weird because I was listening to the Sportsnet podcast today, and they were talking to Todd Bertuzzi, who, by the way, I don't know if maybe you got this from him or if he stole this from you, but he used the phrase "meat and potatoes" hockey players today, which I thought was super funny.
Hey man, we're starting a trend here. You heard it here first, folks. Todd Bertuzzi listens to the podcast. I don't actually know if he does or not. I mean, but if he does, like, that's cool.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, he used that phrase, but he said that they're still running like marathons and stuff. Like, these dudes are freaks.
I mean, they're old by professional like sports standards, but I mean, these guys are still like in their 40s. Like, they might be like closer to middle age now, but I mean, they're still 3 years removed from playing, and they're probably not in the same shape they were when they played. But I mean, these guys are in peak physical condition, and they've been conditioning their bodies to train this way for, I don't know, since they were 18, probably before that, since they were playing in the SHL. So it doesn't surprise me these guys are still in absolutely incredible shape, still out there, performing absolute feats of like superhuman athleticism. So, good for them. I'm glad that they're enjoying their retirement. I mean, it's well earned.
It's just kind of weird because when they first came into the league, obviously it was really before we fully, started.
I mean, we were like 2.
Yeah, so, but when when you watch videos of them coming into the league, they're kind of these like scrawny, like
they were lanky,
awkward, lanky Swedish kids, and now they're like out there running marathons at age 40-something. So.
I mean, it took a little while to go into their bodies. I mean, they also for a long time had a reputation of being soft, which I think was completely unearned. I think it was more with the league at the league of the time than it was them in any particular way. I mean, they were playing their early part of their career. They played in the old clutch and grab trap NHL. So for them to be labeled soft because some guy decided to haul them down in front of the net or along the boards really wasn't fair to them. But I think they finally broke that stigma, and people really started to, like, around the league especially. I know Vancouver fans always really appreciated the Sedins on the ice, and I think across the league it's finally like they earned the respect that they finally deserved at some point in their career. I mean, granted, the Vancouver, that Canucks team that they were on in 2011 that went to the Cup final was really good, but I mean, that team doesn't go anywhere without them. They don't win those 2 President's trophies without them.
No, and they're absolute gentlemen too. I mean, absolutely world-class people, from what I understand, from what pretty much everyone that has ever dealt with them says.
Yeah.
Absolute world-class people. So we're going to, we want to extend our congratulations to the Sedins tonight. Their jersey ceremony will probably be over by the time this goes up, but tonight, 9 p.m., Vancouver Canucks 22 and 33 will never again be worn in a Vancouver Canucks sweater.
Just piggybacking on that, do you think Vancouver retires Roberto Luongo's number at some point?
I think they should. I think, when you really think about Vancouver Canucks goaltenders,
it's him.
It's him and Kirk McLean.
That's pretty much it. And Kirk McLean, and they both got them to the Stanley Cup final and lost in 7 games.
Yeah, I think, Luongo for a very long time was synonymous, like you said. When you thought of Vancouver Canucks, you thought of the Sedins. Especially in our era, you thought of the Sedins, maybe Kevin Bieksa, just because of what a character he was, and Roberto Luongo.
Ryan Kessler, maybe. But yeah, it was essentially the hierarchy of power. Like in the city of Vancouver, the hierarchy is the Sedin twins, Roberto Luongo, and then like the mayor. Like these guys are more popular or meant more to that city than I think anybody really realizes. And to go back on what you're saying, like Roberto Luongo, for all the flack he caught in the following that Stanley Cup final victory, I mean, again, they don't get 2 President's trophies without Roberto Luongo. It's not his fault that the team started to age out of its window when he was there. It's not his fault that Corey Schneider emerged as like a real goaltender in his time there and caused the controversy. And to be honest, Roberto Luongo, I think, handled that all like an absolute professional. I mean, and I totally agree. I think Roberto Luongo's number 1 should absolutely hang from the rafters in Canucks, in Rogers Place, or whatever it's called now.
He's the all-time wins leader with 252. He's got 41 more than Kirk McLean. All-time shutouts leader with 38. He's got 18 more than Kirk McLean. And look, let's be honest here, guys. He caught a lot of flack towards the end of his career, but like you said, the team was kind of aging out of a very competitive division. To be fair, at the time.
He was also getting old. Right. He started playing his career in, I think, 1999. He was a draft pick of the Islanders, gets traded to Florida, plays most of his years on a non-competitive Florida team, where he shined, absolute stud. and went to Vancouver and elevated them to the status of legitimate Stanley Cup favorite. I mean, he got them to the top of that mountain. I mean, not to the top of the mountain, but he got them almost to the top of that mountain. I mean, they were inches away. Game 7, Stanley Cup final.
Yeah. And the thing is, you have to understand something. You know, I understand that, you know, he caught a lot of flack because of the whole contract situation too, but, you know, a lot of that has to also come down to the general manager.
The organization, right? Yeah.
Like, why would you offer a contract, especially after the situation we saw with, you know, how poorly it turned out for Rick DiPietro? Like, you don't sign, you know, you want to lock up your franchise goalies, but you can't sign them to these massive contracts and expect them at age 38 to be still performing like they're 26.
And, you know, not for nothing, but, like, it's not the player's fault he signed that contract. I mean, the organization was willing to sign him to that kind of money for that kind of term. He's not going to say no. He'd be stupid to say no.
Well, why, you know, from a player's perspective,
you don't turn down money.
Even us, yeah.
I mean, not to sound like that guy, but it's like
no, absolutely. I mean, why would you make less money? You know, and you know, that's not to say that, you know, guys won't take discounts. Like we talked at length about how much respect we had for Nathan MacKinnon for taking the hometown discount, but
right
at the same time, I think really the term, from a player's perspective, is great because you're raising a family. Your kids are in school. They're growing up in their community.
There's jobs,
they have friends.
There's security there.
Yeah, you want long-term contracts because especially if you're raising a family, you know, if you're a single guy, you know, it's not as bad, but you know, Luongo has a family, you don't want to be raising kids and then every couple of years, oh, we got to move to, you know, Edmonton, oh, now we got to go down to LA, now we got to go to New York. You know, your kids are growing up in a different community every year. It's tough. Being a hockey family is extremely tough. And if you leave your kids, you know, to stay like we saw last year or 2 years ago when Pat Maroon was in Edmonton, his family decided to stay in St. Louis. I mean, that's extremely hard on the athlete.
I mean, you saw it when he scored that game winner. I mean, his son probably hadn't seen him in months, weeks. I mean, and granted, Luongo then went on to Florida, and his family settled back in Florida because that's where they were originally from his time with the Panthers before he went to Vancouver. But it's like you said, like, there's other considerations here other than just hockey. And the term, like, that's a big part of, like, when they look for term. And again, you can't blame the guy. And I know we talked about Nathan MacKinnon, and we were, you know, gave him a lot of props for taking a hometown discount, but I wouldn't begrudge him for going for an $11.5 million contract because he's earned that.
That's like, what you're worth.
It's not Kevin Hayes, right? Who's never cracked 40 points, more than 50 points, never scored more than, like, who gets that $7.5 million deal where you're like, you really didn't earn that. These are guys like Roberto Luongo at that point had earned that contract. He earned every penny of that contract.
Absolutely.
So, for people to come out and like say that the contract, he signed it and screwed the team, he wanted to fix that situation as much as anybody else did because he knew he didn't want to be a millstone around that team's neck. He wanted to help them. And he did. He went back to Florida. They were able to make a deal for Jacob Markstrom, which is now paying huge dividends because Jacob Markstrom is finally the goaltender everybody knew he could be. And at the end of the day, it resolved itself. Did the rebuild take a little longer than Vancouver fans probably would have liked? Yeah, but that was probably the revolving door of general managers and coaches who couldn't figure out what they wanted. So, you know, that's neither here nor there. But you can't, like I said, you can't begrudge the guy for signing the contract because, like you said, there was stability involved, and he earned that money.
It's also a situation of, I think he also caught a lot of flack because, let's be honest here, Luongo is a very honest guy. When he's not playing well, he's not afraid to tell you he's not playing well. And then when his whole contract situation came up, the famous quote, "My contract sucks." He knows it, and he's an honest guy. And, you know, a lot of hockey fans kind of got on him like, oh, if you know you're not playing well, why don't you just play better?
It's hard.
It's like, yeah, so, like, let me go to your job, like, throw, you know, say, you know, if you work an office job, let me throw 6 weeks of work in front of you. When you can't get it done in 3 days, I come back and I like shove all your stuff off your desk and start yelling at you.
Essentially, I mean, and when you have a bad day at work, when you or I have we both work office jobs now, right? Like menial, paper pushing kind of jobs. Whatever, it pays the bills, right? But like when we have a bad day at work, nobody really notices.
Nobody cares.
Like when I fall asleep at my desk, nobody cares, right? But when Roberto Luongo has a bad day at work, there are 18,000 fans at least watching him in person, and however many thousands or millions more watching on television. So yeah, but he at least he owns it. He has the sense of responsibility to be like, listen guys, like I'm not, this is not where I want to be. I'm trying, but like it's not working. And again, it's like you said, people be like, well, why don't you just play better? It's like, if it were really that easy, don't you think he would just do it?
Right, you think he would, if it was easy to be an NHL goalie, why wouldn't everybody be
right?
an NHL
And it's
goalie?
like it's essentially like any high pressure situation, like sports position, right? Pitchers, quarterbacks, goaltenders, you live and die by these positions, right? Your starting pitcher goes out there and has a bad night. It doesn't matter what you do. He's throwing meatballs. It's over, and
As a Mets fan, we both understand
and
that
he'll come
concept
out,
very well.
He'll come out and just be like, and if he comes out and just goes, I didn't have it tonight. It's like, all right, why don't you just do better? It's like if he could, you think he would.
Right.
So it's like when Luongo has a bad night and everyone's like, oh, he should just be better. It's like you're really unfairly throwing blame at him. And I mean, we at the time joked about his 5-hole too because it was funny. Like it was a good meme, but I didn't diminish the respect we had for Roberto Luongo as a goaltender. I mean, he's top 5 in wins. He's number 3 all time, I think now. Again, another first ballot Hall of Famer easily. Got another guy, probably the greatest goaltender to never win a Stanley Cup. I mean, it's like him, Mika Kiprusoff, maybe Henrik Lundqvist in that conversation, the greatest goaltenders to never win Stanley Cups. John Van Beesbrook might be up there too. But it's like, it's not his fault. I mean, did he have a bad game in Game 7? Yeah, of course he did. And he'll be the first to tell you that. He would have rather have had a different night. Like, he would have rather played that game 10 times over. And I guarantee you, 9 out of 10 times, he is significantly better than he is that night. He just had one off night, and it happened to be that night.
Yeah.
And it happens.
I think as time progresses, Canucks fans will kind of, learn to appreciate just what he brought to that team.
I think all the emotional baggage will be gone from the 2011, and at some point you'll be able to appreciate Roberto Luongo for the absolute professional and just absolute animal he was in the net for them for, I don't think it was that long. It might have been 7 years, but still, like an absolute animal in his prime for them. Again, back-to-back President's trophies. That doesn't happen without Roberto Luongo.
No, and I agree with you. I think at some point we will see number 1 hanging from the rafters.
I want to see it for nothing less than the speech because it's going to be good. I mean, it's Luongo. Like this guy, his social media presence is incredible, and you listen to the guy talk, and he's hilarious.
He's at Strombone1.
Yeah. And if this somehow gets back to Roberto Luongo, we'd love to have you on the podcast. Please contact us.
Yeah, like Steve said, growing up and watching you as we started to really appreciate the game was nothing short of a treat on most nights to see him play.
Even his late career in Florida, where he wasn't particularly, he was over the hill. He was over the hill for
2 good years before it really caught up to him.
Yeah, and then he started to take injuries, and I mean that's what happens when you're a 41-year-old who's been playing since you're 18. I mean your hips and your knees can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
So it's not his fault. But
so I don't doubt that we will see number 1 in the rafters with the Vancouver Canucks 22-33 going up tonight as well. So let's get on to some more NHL news. Let's stay in Canada. The biggest story for most of the season with the Toronto Maple Leafs outside of Mike Babcock was the fact that their backup goaltending was absolutely miserable. Before this trade, their backups had gotten 9 out of a possible 30 points, which is just not good enough.
Atrocious. I mean, what was it? At one point, Frederik Andersen had accounted for 100% of the wins for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I think that was when they were...
Hutchinson was 0-4-4, I think.
Yeah, I think, and Anderson had 27 wins or something by that point, or I don't think it was that high. It might have been like 24 wins, but yeah, the backup goaltending has been an issue in Toronto for, the last 4 years? I mean, essentially since Frederik Andersen showed up.
Yeah, and so Toronto makes a move to remedy that. They go to LA. Toronto acquires goaltender Jack Campbell, who I know you're a very big fan of. They also acquire forward Kyle Clifford. LA retains 50% of Clifford's salary. Clifford's contract is up this year, but LA obviously not being competitive, can afford to take 50% of that back.
Which is interesting because their cap situation is not much better than Toronto's.
Yeah,
considering the veterans that they're still paying, like Drew Doughty,
Kopitar,
Jonathan Quick.
Yeah, and LA out of that deal. So for Kyle Clifford, Jack Campbell, and 50% retained salary, LA gets Trevor Moore, a 2023 from which originally belonged to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and a 2021 conditional third-round pick. The conditions being this third becomes a second if Kyle Clifford resigns or Jack Campbell wins 6 games, which he's already gotten 3. I think he's got 2 wins already out of his 3 games. So it's either or, and to compound, the Leafs must make the playoffs for this to become a second. I have no doubt in my mind that Jack Campbell will win at least 6 games by the end of the year, especially because...
Like you said, he's already won 2 or 3.
I believe it's 2. I think he has 5 out of a possible 6 points out of his starts where he played in Toronto. And Frederik Andersen's status at this point is questionable. He didn't make the road trip with the team. And perhaps with Campbell being, as reliable as he's been, not just in Toronto, but for most of his career, even with a bad LA Kings team last year, he put up some good numbers. Maybe this is a way for Toronto to give whatever's ailing Freddie Andersen enough time to fully heal. Yet, right now, Jack Campbell is 3-2. He's 2-0-0-1. I don't know why NHL still has ties on their stats. It doesn't make any sense. There's no ties.
There haven't been ties since 19 since they introduced the shootout, so 2004.
Get rid of the ties, but he's 2-0-1 with a 2.85 and a 9.18. Let's just go general thoughts. What are your thoughts on this trade for both the Toronto Maple Leafs and the LA Kings?
Well, I mean, it's like you said. Like, I've always been a big fan of Jack Campbell. I mean, since he won the gold medal at the World Juniors with Team USA, I've always been a big fan. I think there was a lot of pressure originally drafted by the Dallas Stars. There was a lot of pressure there in Dallas, and Dallas had a lot of goaltending issues for a long time. And to be honest, Dallas really didn't have a great team for a long time. And when he came out of he did really good in the AHL. He did really good in juniors, obviously, in college. Comes out of that, gets put on a Dallas Stars team that really was spotty on defense, wasn't very good. I mean, you had a Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin, but that was kind of it. I mean, they didn't have John Klingberg at that point. They didn't have Miro Heiskanen, obviously, Alex Radulov.
It's really funny because he played exactly 1 game for the Dallas Stars when, for the longest time, we had heard nothing but elite level talent
ready to go.
And the Dallas Stars kind of just threw him to the curb.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have any issue with Kari Lehtinen. I always thought Kari Lehtinen was a decent goaltender. I mean, he was about a slightly above average number 1 goaltender in the NHL on a good night. I mean, on a bad night he was bad, but I mean, that's anybody, unless you're Carey Price or like Henrik Lundqvist, where on a bad night you're just average.
Right.
So that's not saying anything. But yeah, Dallas gave up on him really early, and then he went out to LA. He went directly from Dallas to LA, and he goes to LA at the very end of their window. I mean, literally the very end of their window, where they stopped being competitive, and has proved himself to be a legitimate, backup goaltender. And some of those seasons, I mean, he was starting close to, he was splitting time with whoever the other guy was, because Jonathan Quickwood was out with injuries.
Peter Budaj at the time, maybe?
It might have been Peter Budaj. At some point, it was Jonathan Bernier. Bernier was gone by that point.
In Toronto.
Yeah.
Toronto.
So, I mean, I don't know. I think that's a really good move, because now there's stability in Toronto's goaltending, and like you said, he can play these games, so Toronto can give Frederik Andersen the break that he needs, in case he does have a small nagging injury, because you want Frederik Andersen healthy for the playoffs. I mean, yeah, is Jack Campbell good? But you'd rather have Frederik Andersen. There's not a shot at Jack Campbell. Frederik Andersen's a top 5 goaltender right now, and he's playing like it. But the interesting part is the Kyle Clifford, because goes back to something we've been talking about with Toronto for a long time, which is the roster construction flawed because it's not very hard to play against. Kyle Clifford adds an element that I think Toronto really was missing. He's big, he's strong, he's a checking, grinding forward, which they really don't have a lot of. And I wouldn't be surprised if Toronto make moves for guys at the deadline that are more in this mold to try to ramp up, because they got bullied by the Boston Bruins. I mean, yeah, did they go 7 games with them? But there were games where Toronto blew them off the ice and looked like the absolute better team when they could skate. But when Boston slowed them down, Toronto had a really hard time playing with the Boston Bruins because they were getting checked and pushed around and they got bullied. I think a guy like Kyle Clifford helps to remedy that. I mean, he's not an enforcer and he's not like that. I mean, he's a gamer. I've seen him fight before, but that's not what you want out of him. And you don't really even need to fight. He just needs to be out there to throw the hits and take the hits, because it shows you're not going to get pushed around, and that's a big psychological effect too for the guys up in the lineup like Austin Matthews and William Nylander and Mitch Marner, where it's like, all right, well, if he's not going to take a step back, then we shouldn't either. And Kyle Clifford, 2-time Stanley Cup champion, brings pedigree to the locker room, a lot of playoff experience. Trevor Moore, I think, is a younger guy, isn't he? I believe
he's like between 24 and 26, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so I mean, like, it fits into what LA's trying to do. I don't know much about him, so I really can't comment on it. But the third round picks aren't bad. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the conditional third becomes a second. I mean, like, I'd almost guarantee it. I wouldn't guarantee it, but I would say there's a really high probability. The only caveat is the Leafs must make the playoffs, and the fact that how competitive the Eastern Conference is, that there's a real worry that Toronto might not make the playoffs.
Trevor Moore is 24.
But I think Jack Campbell will now stabilize Toronto, where there's a chance that I think they will look like the team we expected them to be. They're going to make the playoffs, and if they're not in a divisional spot, they might play a wild card. But I mean, that doesn't matter. I mean, there's no shame in being a wild card in this Eastern Conference. I mean, you're going to be a wild card team with like 100 points, like.
Yeah.
So I mean, there are going to be good teams missing the playoffs with 90 plus points. It's going to be stupid, honestly. So I think this trade. I honestly think this trade's good. I think it works for both teams. I think it addresses a lot of issues that both teams had. I mean, LA can get rid of the Kyle Clifford contract, which I don't think is very much. I mean, it's something. So it's nothing. I don't think it's not crazy. Obviously, it's not like you're dumping like a $7 million contract. But anything helps to get off the books when you're the crunch like they are with the aging contracts that they have that are like almost albatrosses on that roster.
Yeah, his contract is $1.6 million for just this year. So essentially, you cut that in half. Toronto's paying him $800,000, and the Kings are paying him $800,000.
Yeah, so I mean, getting anything off the books helps. I mean, being able to get any like salary cap relief at all is helpful in this league. So, getting rid of that $800,000. I mean, well, it sounds insignificant when you see guys signing contracts for $11 million, but that $800,000 could be a make or break between being able to sign that $11 million contract or not. Because if you don't have, it's the little things, they add up. So, and Trevor Moore helps LA. I don't know about now, but maybe in a couple of years when he's a little older. It fits into that rebuilding kind of idea that they have. 24 isn't too old, and if they're going on a 3-year rebuild, he's 27 at the tail when they start to try to make the playoffs. He's hitting his prime, his physical prime. It works. Getting draft picks is always helpful, especially for like a rebuilding team. You want to just stockpile as many draft picks in the first 3 rounds as you can. Especially with the draft this year that we've been hearing is extremely deep through the first 3 rounds. So, I think it's a good trade. I mean, I really do. I think this one actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so ultimately I think kind of what this came down to was, it's funny because the trade call for this was placed in the third period of the Toronto Maple Leafs New York Rangers game. The decision that Kyle Dubas made the decision to make this trade in the third period. So in the middle of the game. The trade call happened officially to the NHL after the game. Yeah,
I mean, I imagine they'd probably been talking about it for a little while, and then watching that game, he was probably like, "Okay,
this is the last straw."
He's like, "We need to fix this." Like, and there's not a shot at Michael Hutchinson. Michael Hutchinson's probably a really good AHL goaltender. He's probably a really good number 1 AHL goaltender, really low end backup in the NHL. And listen, for as bad as that sounds, there is nothing wrong with being a good AHL ice hockey player. You're still a professional. You're still making 6 figures. You still get to live the life. It's not as glamorous as the NHL, obviously, and it's obviously not where you want to be. Everybody wants to make the show. But, like, if you can't make it, you can't make it. And there's nothing wrong in being good in where you belong.
Yeah.
So I think this just kind of slots in. He's a good number. He'll be a third-string goaltender now. Because, I don't know if he has to clear waivers. I think he's
on a one-way contract.
I think he might have already cleared waivers earlier this year, though, because they did send him down to start the season, at the beginning of the season, to try to fix this. So they might just send him back down. So, I mean, again, Hutchinson's hasn't been great for the Maple Leafs, but they really haven't played great in front of him either. So it's a mixed bag, but I think this just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, like Steve said, ultimately, this was definitely a deal that had been in the works. You don't make a 3-player trade on a whim. The call did come down in the middle, or the call went out to the NHL after the game, but Dubas called Rob Blake in the middle of the game. I think this says a lot about where the LA Kings are going. I think they believe that Cal Peterson is going to be the next starter in this LA Kings team for years to come. He was called up after this trade was made. Right now, they still have Michael Hutchinson on the roster in Toronto. The idea is that when Freddie Anderson's ready to be healthy, Hutch will be waived. I think that this brings a lot to Toronto that we haven't seen before. There's been a narrative, and Anderson has said it himself, that in the playoffs he's been tired, and it helps now that you have a goalie like Jack Campbell who is used to starting 20 to 30 games to take a load off of Frederik Andersen. I mean, there's only so much you can ask from your goaltender to play 67 games a season and then go in and play against the Boston Bruins. I've watched the 3 games that Jack Campbell has played for the Toronto Maple Leafs because I've been very interested in this trade. And look, he's not blowing the socks off of anybody. He's not, Carey Price 2.0, but he's making the saves that you want him to make. And that's your only job as a backup is to try to get maybe 55% of the points you possibly can and just make the saves you're supposed to make. And he's doing both of those right now. The one thing that worries me a little bit about Campbell is he's a little busy in the net in that he's very active. He's always sliding. He's always moving. And with a team like Toronto where things get pretty hectic in the defensive zone pretty quickly, he might get caught out of position a couple times, whereas a guy like Frederik Andersen, who's very centered, very even, he's going to be in the right position. But he's looked really good. I mean, he's had 2 really strong games against the Canadiens and against the Arizona Coyotes the other night. His first game against Anaheim, a little shaky, but I mean, it's your first game in Toronto, so what do you want?
And he's playing in Toronto, right?
Yeah. So, and then, the thing about Kyle Clifford is it's really funny when you listen to the press conference that Kyle Dubas gave. Somebody asked him, is this your way of saying we needed a little bit of toughness? And Kyle Dubas said, we want our players to be tough, but we also want them to be able to play. And to be fair, Kyle Clifford can play hockey. I mean, he's gotten 10 goals a couple times. He's not just some fourth-line plug who you're going to throw out on the ice to, feed somebody their lunch for lunch. Although he certainly can do that. But he can play. He's a legitimate 8 to 10 goal scorer. And, I mean, from a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, that's all you're asking out of him. But, yeah, I think I really like this trade for Toronto because, to your point earlier, this gives the top guys a little bit more confidence. I mean, we saw it over and over again in the beginning of the season. Matthews was getting elbowed. Tyson Barrie caught an elbow in the face. Morgan Riley caught an elbow up high early in the season. And nobody was doing anything. I mean, even a guy like Jake Muzzin, who he plays a hard, tough game, I think Muzzin realized, hey, I'm really important to the most of this team's facets. I play on the penalty kill. I can play on the power play if I need to be. I can't be sitting in the box for 5 minutes. I think bringing in a guy like Clifford, who you said, he's not a nuclear deterrent like a Ryan Reeves or, even like a guy like
Tom Wilson to a degree.
Like Tom Wilson or like Matt Martin, who's just, I love Matt Martin, don't get me wrong, but he plays 6 minutes a night, and or actually a better example is Ross Johnston. Ross Johnston's the guy that the Islanders have right now that when we play teams like the Capitals or the Dallas Stars with Roman Polak, we put him out there just to be settle things down. So having a guy like Kyle Clifford might make somebody like Tom Wilson think twice, or he might make somebody like Brad Marchand think twice about doing something because, okay, now we have Kyle Clifford and Jake Muzzin. Now we have a little bit of grind and grit and snarl on this team, and now I got to think twice about doing something.
Right, and like you said, it's not a nuclear deterrent, right? It's not the idea of mutually assured destruction. It's not oh, geez, I got Ryan Reeves coming after me all night now. And even if he doesn't try, even if he doesn't fight you, it's I have him trying to run me through the boards for the next however long is left in the game, say 36 minutes, he's going to try and come out here and just
kill me.
Yeah. But it's still a deterrent. I mean, it's still, like you said, it's not going to do anything crazy, and this goes back to the conversation in just hockey in general, which this is kind of changing gears, but I think it's relevant to this, is that we talk about the death of the enforcer, right? The idea that you only have a guy on the roster who plays maybe 2 minutes a night, and his whole job is to act as that nuclear deterrent. He goes out there and fights, and that's it. The NHL's changed now to the point where that's not a thing. You don't have guys like that because they have to be able to play. And to your point, Kyle Clifford can play. He can play in your bottom six. You can slot him in comfortably. He can play like 8 to 10 minutes a night. He's not going to be a liability. I mean, again, he's not going to be some defensive stalwart, and he's not going to be a 30-goal scorer. But that's not what you're asking for out of him. You're expecting to go out there and forecheck hard, skate, back check, and play like a heavy game. And that's what Toronto is really missing. I mean, Toronto wants, especially since Toronto's built to have the puck, right? They're built for puck possession. You need guys like Kyle Clifford because he's going to go in there and he's going to get that puck. He's going to go in there and he's going to throw a hit. He's going to do something to free up that puck in the corner. And that's really all you want. So it's important. Having guys like this is really important. And I think in the end, the new NHL, we're losing sight of things like that because Toronto is very much a team built on this new age philosophy. And for all it's worth, they have to look back into the way that traditional hockey and have to go out and get a guy like Kyle Clifford. I mean, granted, I don't think Kyle Clifford was like the sticking point of this trade, but to even warrant picking a guy like Kyle Clifford up in this trade says a lot about where they need, what they were thinking in the locker room or in the front office.
And if you look at it this way, yeah, it's a good point where a lot of teams, well, not a lot of teams, but there are some teams now that are looking at the NHL and saying, oh, the game in 5 to 10 years is going to be all speed, all puck possession. And look, maybe in 10 years we'll be sitting back and saying, yeah, the game changed. But as of right now, in this very league, and for the foreseeable future, I personally don't see the game ever being totally speed, totally possession. I think you're always going to need a Kyle Clifford or a Matt Martin or an Alex Pietrangelo or even a guy like Johnny Boychuk. You're always going to need somebody that's hard to play against, and if nothing else, because you need to keep idiots in check.
Right.
And not that I'm saying any of the guys that I'm about to name are idiots, but if let's look at it from a playoff perspective. If the Leafs are playing the Tampa Bay Lightning in the first round, Pat Maroon, Victor Hedman, Cedric Paquette, Alex Killorn, these guys play hard, heavy, fast hockey, and they're hard to play against. So you need somebody to keep. So if Cedric Paquette goes and blows up Austin Matthews without the puck in the neutral zone, you need an answer to that. If they play the Bruins, I mean, do I even need to talk about how hard the Boston Bruins are to play against?
No.
If they cross over into the Metro, you play the Capitals. Now you're playing Tom Wilson. Even Alex Ovechkin plays a hard, heavy game now. You're playing the Pittsburgh Penguins. Patrick Hornquist is still on that roster. I mean, you still need guys to keep people in check.
And if for nothing, it's a morale thing too, right? Like you said, Austin Matthews. Say just any of these guys blows up Austin Matthews with an elbow in the neutral zone, or not even elbow, just blows him up, just totally runs him over, hits him cleans his clock. You don't have to send Kyle Clifford out there to try and fight the guy. You can just send him out there and he'll just take a run at somebody, and throw a big hit, and that says a lot, and it sends a message. It sends a message both to them and to your bench that listen, we're not taking this. We're not going to just sit here and take it. And now, like you said, and then after a consistent series of that in the playoffs specifically, after 2-3 games, you get to the point where those guys are going to start thinking twice about doing things. It's like, all right, well, he did that, so, and we can't afford to lose David Pastrnak, so we don't want a guy like Clifford or Muzzin coming and taking a run at Pastrnak now because we're trying to run Austin Matthews over. So it gets to the point where it's like, all right, maybe we should rein it. It gets reined in. It calms things down. And it makes things a little more interesting because now there's an element to that game. There's a level of unpredictability, right? Because now there's a guy that's not volatile, but there's an answer. It's not, you're not going to go watch the game and get bored because you're like, oh, well, the Bruins are just bullying the Leafs again, or Washington's just bullying the Leafs. It's like, no, the Leafs they're going to stand, and I think this is going to permeate through the whole roster. It's going to send like I said, it's going to send that message. It's really going to build that philosophy up where it's team toughness. Because like you said, when Pittsburgh won those 2 Stanley Cups, there really wasn't a guy on that roster that was a tough guy, right? But they had Patrick Hornquist. They had, even Sidney Crosby to a degree. Guys that were
tank plays with an edge.
Yeah, guys that were a little more willing to go in there and throw those hits and be like, all right, well, you're gonna try and take runs at us. We're gonna take runs at you, And it became a team toughness because then you saw guys you saw other guys that aren't traditionally that physical, like Phil Kessel getting and throwing hits and being like, all right, well, I'm not gonna take this from you. And I think that's what this is. That might be the X factor that this. We're not gonna see it. We're not gonna be able to quantify it, but that might be an X factor that comes out of this trade. Where now Toronto's gonna be like, listen, I'm not gonna take this from the Bruins. I'm not gonna sit here and let them try to push me around. Toronto's gonna say we're a better team and we're gonna show it. And to your point about the league in 5 to 10 years, I mean, who knows, right? I don't think it's ever going to get to that point either where it's all speed, all puck possession, no hitting.
4 lines of snipers. And
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to get to that point. But the perfect example of where the NHL is right now is the two teams that played for the Stanley Cup last year. The St. Louis Blues and the Boston Bruins. Big, strong, checking teams. Do the Boston Bruins have some speed on that team? Yeah, they have actually a significant amount of speed through that roster. I mean, Marchand, Bergeron, Pasternak, Krejci not so much anymore, but even to a degree, McAvoy, Krug. I mean, Jake DeBrusk, Noah Chari was on that roster, so it's like there was some speed there. And St. Louis isn't the fastest team, but I mean, David Perron, Alex Pietrangelo, Tarasenko. Like, these are guys that can move around the ice. Like there's skill, there's speed, but there still was a really important physical element to this roster that I think Toronto is realizing that they still need, because the NHL it's not the NHL of 10 years from now. This isn't the 2030 NHL season. It's 2020. And just based on the way the league was trending, it only makes sense because, like I said, look at the 4 teams that played in the conference finals, 2 outside of that. It was Boston and Carolina. Carolina also built on that speed puck possession game, gets it swept. Carolina goes out and gets a little bigger this year. They're much harder to play against. I mean, they get Joel Edmondson in the offseason for Justin Falk. They made themselves a little bigger, a little harder to play against the back end. And then who did St. Louis knock out? It
wasn't Dallas, was it? I think Dallas was round 2.
It was round 2. Was it the Sharks in the Pacific Division? Yeah, it was the Sharks. I think it might have been the San Jose Sharks. San Jose Sharks is a little different. I mean, the San Jose Sharks, they're bigger. There's a little bit of a heavier edge to that team. I mean, the Brett Burns, Joe Thornton, Joe Pavelski. So there's, like, the teams that got far were teams that had this edge. It wasn't all this just puck possession skating game that Toronto wanted. So
I think it was San Jose.
So I think this is really this is Toronto's front office being like, oh, well, maybe the roster was a little flawed.
I think another big part of this trade, bringing in Kyle Clifford, is Toronto's had a really hard time holding leads this season. They've had a really tough time holding a lead. And one of those things that a tough guy or, more of a gamer or a grinder like Kyle Clifford will bring you is it settles things down when things start going bad. Say you're up 4-2 in the third period, or you're up 4-1 in the third period, and the other team scores 2 quick goals, and now you're starting to panic. Now you're like, oh God, now it's 4-3. A guy like Kyle Clifford will go out there, throw a big hit, shift the momentum back into your corner. And momentum is so big in hockey. It's so important. And to have a guy like Kyle Clifford, when things start going bad, you know exactly what you're getting out of Kyle Clifford. And it's important to have a guy who's that steady, that straight line kind of type player who, you're getting beaten up in the offensive zone or in the defensive zone. They're scoring a couple of big goals on you. He's going to go out there, throw a couple big hits, settle the game back down to where it should be, and shift the momentum, if not into your corner, at least back into neutral.
And I mean, like you said, he's gonna go out there, throw that big hit, and he's gonna go out there and he's gonna hound that puck. He's gonna dig for that puck. He's gonna make it hard for them to build on that momentum. He's gonna make it really hard for that momentum to swing any more than it has. And even outside of what he brings, like, on the ice, he's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. He knows what it takes to win. And I don't know how much of a leader he is in the locker room. I don't know if he's very vocal, but even still, like, on a younger team like Toronto, he can just be like, guys, listen, we've been here before. It's not a big deal. We just forget about the goals. Just keep playing the way we've been playing, and we'll be fine. Because what happens in Toronto, like you said, they panic. Now it's like, oh no, we blew it. We got to do something else. And it's like they try to change what they're doing, and it's like, no, we steady the ship, stay the course, because it was working. Just play your game, and you'll get to the finish line, and you'll probably win the game because up to that point, you've been playing well enough. And I mean, that's what it takes to win a Stanley Cup, and that's what I think, like, that's an element that he brings also, is that, like, another unquantifiable X factor, but just the sheer experience. I mean, outside of those 2 Stanley Cups, he also played a lot of playoff games. I mean, they were played in the Western Conference Finals. It was them and Chicago playing in the Western Conference. It was them, Chicago, and Anaheim playing in Western Conference Finals for like 6 years. It was whoever won that was going to win a Stanley Cup, essentially. It was Chicago, LA, like 3 times, and whoever won that won a Stanley Cup. Like, 2013 was them, Blackhawks win. 2014, the LA Kings win. They go to the Stanley Cup Final. They win. 2015, they play the Blackhawks. Blackhawks beat them, win a Stanley Cup. Like, so he knows what it takes to get there, but he also just knows he just knows what it takes to win hockey games. Just to settle things down and be like, listen, it's okay. We're not in a bad spot. There's no reason to hit the panic button.
And that's huge for a team that's, let's be honest here, outside of him and Jake Muzzin, they don't really have a lot of experience in playoffs in that locker room. Him and Jake Muzzin really being the only two that have really been there before. So I do want to ask you, does this change your opinion on the viability of the Toronto Maple Leafs as a Stanley Cup contender?
I think if they add maybe one or two more guys in the Kyle Clifford mold, yes. If they go out and get a guy from Chicago, say like, I don't even know, like,
go to LA and ask them go back to the LA well, ask him to retain some salary and get Dustin Brown.
Yeah, or something like that. It's just somebody.
I don't know if that's cap viable, but a guy like that.
Yeah, or just even just somebody like Chris Kreider. There's somebody that's like Chris Kreider's a little different. He's like a top 6 winger, but like just somebody that's got a lot of playoff experience, but will also bring a physical edge and is a little bigger, a little more willing to throw his body around on a roster that's really not that physical. And again, like I think the biggest thing is the X factor. They need guys who've been there before, because this roster, like you said, I think like they have a combined like 12 games of playoff experience. Maybe I don't know. That's not that low. It's probably between like 14. It's probably between like 14 and 20, because they played the Bruins twice, both went to 7 games, and then the year before that they didn't make the playoffs. I don't know. They played the Washington Capitals and it went 5 games, I think. So there's like between 14 and 20 games they have. Whereas Jake Muzzin's probably got like 40-something playoff games under his belt because of all those years in LA. I mean, so they need something like that to really helps. And I think stabilizing your backup goaltending was huge for the Maple Leafs. I think if Jack Campbell, like you said, can win 55% of the games that they put him in for going forward, I don't see why Toronto isn't. They're not a favorite. For me, they're not a lock for Stanley Cup. But I think now they're one of those outside. They have an outside shot at it, like, and not by much. It's not like an outside shot where it's like, it's a long shot. It's just like, no, it's a bubble Stanley Cup contender, because the favorites are the St. Louis Blues, Tampa Bay now. I mean, I think Tampa Bay's knocked Boston into the long shot conversation because Boston hasn't been very good lately. Washington, Colorado, Dallas. I mean, Dallas is probably in the long shot category too, but teams that we were expecting to be really good and that are really good. We're like, okay, these are like the 4 teams that we expect to play for a Stanley Cup, but these are the other teams that can compete with them and knock them out, and we wouldn't be all that surprised. And I think Toronto's in that second category. Teams that can compete with these teams, and I wouldn't be surprised if they went out and knocked out the Boston Bruins or the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm like, okay, this roster is honestly pound for pound just as talented as the Tampa Bay Lightning roster. So, and the Tampa Bay's tearing it up. So if Toronto can get on a tear like that, I don't see why they couldn't go in hot and win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. I'm going to put them in the maybe category just because I still am not thrilled with a lot of the roster construction here. Adding Kyle Clifford helps a lot. I mean, we just talked for like 20 minutes about how important it is to add something like him. But again, he is just one player, and a lot of teams that we saw competing for Stanley Cups the last couple of years have had top 6 guys that are in a Kyle Clifford mold, like a Ryan O'Reilly and Alex Ovechkin, Tom Wilson, even
just like bigger guys,
Patrick Hornquist, Evgeny Malkin. So I'm still not thrilled with the idea of this Toronto Maple Leafs roster, but I think adding a guy like Kyle Clifford definitely puts them now in the conversation where, like you said, if they win, I'm not going to be surprised. And yeah, I think giving Freddie Anderson time to become 100% healthy, because if Hutch was still their backup goaltender, technically starter right now because of injury, that they'd have to rush Freddie Anderson back because every game matters now. But with a guy like Jack Campbell, you can give Freddie enough time to completely heal, and maybe we won't see the Freddie Anderson that gets tired in the playoffs because he's had to play 67+ games in the regular season.
Also, I just want to say something. The fact that he gets tired, like, people have talked about that, like, is he just not in good enough shape? It's like, no, he started 67 games in the regular season.
For, by the way, a Toronto Maple Leafs team that doesn't defend exactly the greatest.
Yeah.
He's not starting 67 games behind
the Boston Bruins,
the old Nashville Predator defense, or even the Islanders defense from last year, where you're seeing maybe 25 to 30 shots a night, and they're all from the outside. Like, he's seeing like 6 or 7 shots from the slot, like 5 or 6 cross crease one-timers.
Probably a couple of high danger deflections coming in right out in front of him, and he's got to try and come up with a save. I mean, and the fact that he was winning, I mean, he won, I think he won like 40 games last year. So to win 40 games out of 67 starts, that takes a toll on your body. That's hard. That's really hard. So
it's also a mental grind because, playing behind a team like that is not easy. Does it help that he has the scoring support? So, if he lets in a bad goal, he can't, he's probably thinking, all right, like, we're going to be able to get that back. Like, it's not a big deal. But it's also that mental grind of, like, oh, my God, like, another night of 40-something shots.
It's got to be exhausting. It's also mentally exhausting because you're just always locked in and ready. Like, you're always waiting for those 40 shots. You know what I mean? It's probably like Ryan. Like, the best analogy is probably like Ryan Miller in those couple years where Buffalo was semi-competitive but wasn't making the playoffs, where he was going on those runs of like 11, 12, 13 wins at the end of the season trying to get them in, and he was seeing like 45 to 50 shots, and it was like, that's got to be just a grind. It's just hard on your body. It's hard on you mentally, because it's just got to be so mentally exhausting seeing that many shots every night. There's no other way to put it. Like, even like physically, yeah, you're obviously going to be tired. But everybody's tired. After 82 games, it's a grind. Everybody's beat up. Everyone's banged up. Everyone's tired. But just like mentally, it's got to be so draining to have to go out there and be like, okay, I know we don't defend that well. I know I'm going to see a lot of, you're going to see a lot of high danger chances, but I got to stick it out. I got to just stick in it and just hope for the best, And I mean, like I said, he won 40 games, so he did more than hope for the best. He was better than hoping for the best.
Yeah, so I think we're both in agreement that this is a great trade for the Toronto Maple Leafs, pretty much in all facets, and the LA Kings get a good piece too out of this situation. Another trade that came on the block here: Pittsburgh Penguins and the Minnesota Wild. Man, you know what one of the loneliest jobs in the NHL must be? Amateur scout for the Pittsburgh Penguins. I mean, how many draft picks and prospects do these guys trade away on a yearly basis? I mean, it's wild. So the Pittsburgh Penguins acquire forward Jason Zucker from the Minnesota Wild, and Minnesota acquires forward Alex Galchenyuk, a defenseman Kalen Addison, who's currently a 19-year-old playing in the WHL.
Also, the Penguins' #1 rated prospect.
That's very important to note, yeah. And the 2020 conditional first-round pick. The condition on that pick being the Pittsburgh Penguins can defer this to 2021 if they miss the playoffs this year. Boy, I gotta be honest with you. If I'm Pittsburgh, this is not to disparage anything about Jason Zucker, but boy, I mean, your top-rated prospect and a guaranteed first, whether from this year or next year for Jason Zucker, I mean, again, not to disparage anything, Zucker is a legitimate top 6 winger. He's a guy that can score you 30 goals with the right teammates. He's as fast as anything. I mean, the guy's got wheels, but I mean, boy, I mean, when you look at it in the context of
to essentially trade away all those pieces and get one player, not even like a conditional third or like a 4th-round pick or anything, like just something small, some consolation, like just Jason Zucker. What this trade really did for me, honestly, before we talk about any of the players or anything, what it really did was make me question the value on the market for these players now. Like, if Jason Zucker, granted, I think he has two or three more years left on his deal after this year, but like, what kind of package could the Rangers pull in for a guy like Chris Kreider if Jason Zucker is pulling in Kale and Addison, the #1 rated prospect out of their system, and a guaranteed first-round pick, whether it's this year or next year, and Alex Galchenyuk, who isn't really a slouch but has been underperforming up this far in his career, who I think, with surrounded with the right teammates, could be a good player for them.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it that way, I mean, look, again, nothing against Jason Zucker, but if I told you I'm giving you my top-rated prospect and a first-round pick, I would have thought that would be a trade for Chris Kreider. Or a trade for, maybe if you can try to swing somebody out of LA, maybe you're getting like
Tyler Toffoli
out of this deal. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, look, Pittsburgh needs a top scoring winger because they've been missing Jake Gensel for how many games now?
Well, Gensel's still he's out long term. He's out until at least the middle of April, I think. So he's out until at least the end of the first round.
So they've been missing, him for a long time. They've been missing Bukestad for a long time. Crosby's been banged up. Malkin's been banged up. I mean, the amount of man games lost on this roster is crazy. And I think that's why Jim Rutherford has made this trade, because he understands that and he's going for it. I think this is really him saying, look, while we're still in this Crosby-Malkin era, we're going for it. We're not going to accept, we made it to the second round. Good job, guys. I think Jim Rutherford's really saying we're going to get another cup in the Crosby-Malkin era, but this is one of these trades that I think we're going to look back on in 3 years when the Penguins are on the downswing and heading towards the dumps, and we're looking at this going like, wow, how nice would it have been to have Kalen Addison to build around?
And I don't know if Kalen Addison's necessarily an elite level prospect, but it's still nice to have you want these young guys in your system, because even if he turns out to be like a number 3, number 4 guy, those are guys you need. Those are guys you need to be competitive. And a guaranteed first. I mean, this rebuild when it's all said and done in Pittsburgh, this rebuild is gonna be long.
It's gonna be Detroit Red Wings level of
bad. Like 5 to 7 years of just bad. 5 years of guaranteed at least bad, and then 2 or 3 years of just complete mediocrity. Of just being all right, well, they're kind of not terrible, but they're not good either. So I don't know. It's gonna be like you said, 5 years of Detroit level bad, and then 2 or 3 years of Montreal Canadiens, where it's all right, they're kind of okay. I don't know. I don't know what I'm getting out of them, so whatever. They do everything kind of badly, or they do everything kind of average.
I think if Pittsburgh is smart, I don't see them missing the playoffs this year anymore. I predicted them to miss the playoffs in the beginning of the year, and to be fair, for a while it looked like they might.
Well, I mean, when you lose what is it? Something ridiculous 400 man games to injury or something
But I think if Pittsburgh's smart, they're just going to give the first up from this year, just because, boy, what happens if you defer to next year and then you miss the playoffs? Because, I've been predicting the downfall of the Penguins for 2 or 3 years now, but, I mean, you just have to really start to question when the roster's getting as old as it is. It happens quickly. I mean, we've seen rosters fall off. I mean, look, the San Jose Sharks last year played the third round, and this year they're just,
The New York Rangers played in the second round with against the Ottawa Senators next year, not in the playoffs.
Yeah, so it happens hard, it happens fast, and you really got to question, is it really smart to even try to defer this pick? But I think this is an excellent trade for Minnesota. Unfortunately, I think this is kind of them signaling that we're throwing in the towel here.
I mean, which isn't a bad thing. It's just
something that they've needed to do for a while.
But it's 3 or 4 years too late.
Yeah.
It's all right, well, I'm glad you're waving the white flag now, but you already lost. It's already over. Everybody knew.
It's just kind of strange because right now they sit 4 points out of the playoffs with 3 games in hand. But I think that they understand in Minnesota, we can't keep making the playoffs by 3 points, getting crunched in the first round, and then expect things to get better. So I love this trade from Minnesota. You're getting Galchenyuk, who, if he flops in Minnesota too, who cares? It doesn't matter. This trade could not even include Alex Galchenyuk. I think that's another large part of it is Pittsburgh needed that contract off the books. But for Minnesota, it's a low-risk situation. If he flops, who cares? You're going to be bad anyway. If he reclaims his career, he might be trade bait.
Or he might be a guy you build around because he's only 24.
Yeah, and you're getting a top-level prospect, somebody that the Penguins were really high on and a guaranteed first. I think this is great. For the Penguins, I gotta say, I appreciate Jim Rutherford's aggressiveness. I know why he's doing this, and I understand that when you have players that are on the level of Crosby and Malkin, you never want to just be it's okay, we'll make the second round, right? But man, the long-term implications of this trade, it's good for now, but in a couple of years, I mean, that's gonna hurt. Does this change your mind about Pittsburgh and their Stanley Cup viability?
No, I still don't think they're very viable. I don't think the roster is very deep. I mean, they've been proving me wrong all year, right? They're sitting...
Right now they sit
they're
in
like second in the
place
Metro.
in the Metro. They have 74 points to the next closest. They're 3 points behind Washington, who sit at 77. They have a game in hand. And they're 2 points up on the Islanders, who sit with 72, and they have the same number of games.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think if the Islanders manage to find their form again, which I think they will, I mean, especially if they manage to get a scoring winger like we've been talking about, somebody like Tyler Toffoli. What was that? No, but yeah, if the Islanders manage to regain their form from like that, what was it, like 17-game point streak, if they manage to find like even half of that form, or just play as good as that, I'm not saying they're going to get another 17-game point streak, I'm saying if they've managed to play as well as they did then, and are winning every, 2 out of 3, every 4 out of 5, that's important. Like that'll make it really scary for the Pittsburgh Penguins, because now that's a team that they don't want to play.
The team that swept them out of the playoffs last year.
Right, exactly, and that's a team that'll probably knock them into a wild card, because you also have Carolina still playing out there. Carolina's just sitting outside of the playoffs, I think, right now. Yeah, you have Carolina with 67 points. They're 5 points back with Pittsburgh having a game in hand, but you also have Philly and Columbus chasing you. So and Columbus is only 2 points back and Pittsburgh has 2 games in hand, but still. Elvis Merzlikins is playing like Jesus Christ incarnate right now. So these are teams I'm not counting out. Like if I'm Pittsburgh, I don't feel safe where I am right now, because every team chasing me, outside of maybe Columbus, because of like something we're going to talk about, the Seth Jones injury, that really hurts. But outside of like that, I really wouldn't feel comfortable sitting where I am right now, because this division's so good and it's honestly really volatile. Because I mean, New York, the Islanders were sitting in a wild card like 3 days ago. Now they're back up in the division with a chance to catch the Penguins, and I really wouldn't feel safe about Pittsburgh, especially with missing all those pieces that they have. Bjugstad,
Jake Gensel, on pace for like 50 goals.
Yeah, Jake Gensel was their leading scorer, literally floating their offense when Crosby was out. And adding Jason Zucker is like, okay, cool, and like maybe he could hit 30 goals, like maybe he's guaranteeing at least 20 to 25. Like that's where I think I see him most years. Playing with Crosby, he might hit 30, 35. It might be like the James Neal effect, right, where a career 20 goal scorer has a 40 goal a year playing with Evgeny Malkin. But man,
no, I mean I agree. I think when you look at Stanley Cup viability, you have to compare yourself to those teams that we named before. You have to compare yourself to the St. Louis Blues, the Avalanche, the Tampa Bay Lightning at this point, the Washington Capitals. I gotta be honest with you, with the current state of the Pittsburgh Penguins roster, I can't really see them beating many of those teams in a 7-game series. Again, it's so hard to count Crosby and Malkin out.
Oh, it really
is. You
is.
Never want to do it. But at the same time, if the Penguins play the Blues in a 7-game series, I don't see it happening. I don't see them beating the Colorado Avalanche. I don't even see them beating the Tampa Bay Lightning. I don't see them beating the Washington Capitals.
I don't see them coming out of the division. Like in the divisional rounds of the playoffs, the first and second round, I really don't see them getting out of there. I mean, there are so few favorable matchups for the Pittsburgh Penguins right now with the way this roster is built, and just in general. I mean, we talked about the Edmonton Oilers a couple weeks back, or maybe not a couple weeks, but like earlier in the season, we talked about how there aren't a lot of favorable matchups for the Edmonton Oilers in that playoff bracket. And I'm looking at this, and even if Pittsburgh crosses over into the Atlantic, that's even worse.
You're playing the Bruins,
the Lightning, the Leafs. Even the Leafs aren't a good matchup for them. The Leafs have better goaltending. Their talent is like pound for pound, the roster's more talented, and their top level stars are probably. I mean, obviously they're not as good as. I'm not gonna say Austin Matthews is as good as Sidney Crosby, but like they're almost on that level. They have like S-rank players, like elite superstar level talent. So they have firepower that Pittsburgh honestly really doesn't have outside of Malkin and Crosby. And then going on to the next one, it's like, do you want to play the Islanders again? Not really, especially if the Islanders manage to regain any semblance of their like last year's playoffs, because it's just like.
It's just not a good matchup.
No, because they're
it's a defensive team that has proven that they can shut you down.
Yeah, and if they manage to shut down Crosby and Malkin, where's your team? Like, who are you relying on? Jason Zucker? Like, again, not a shot at Jason Zucker, but it's like Jason Zucker isn't like a game breaker. He's just not. Yeah, it's not like Jake Gensel. At least Jake Gensel adds some firepower to that roster.
It's real tough.
Again, and then Washington's an awful matchup for them. I mean, we've seen those legendary battles for years, but that's not a good matchup. Now more than ever, that is a terrible matchup for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Because again, they have a guy that's on par with Crosby in terms of talent. You have Alexander Ovechkin. And I'm going to go out here and say it, the greatest goal scorer in NHL history. Pure goal scorer in NHL history. Greatest, just the best. That guy, you have him matching up with Crosby. You have, maybe not now, because Kuznetsov's shoulder looked like it was really banged up the other night. But if a healthy Kuznetsov, you have a guy that can match up against Malkin. He's not as big. And then you have Nick Backstrom, TJ Oshie, Tom Wilson, John Carlson, and you have Ilya Samsonov and Braden Holtby. That's just not a matchup they want. So I don't see Pittsburgh's path to the Stanley Cup. I really just don't see it. And again, like you said, you can't count out Crosby and Malkin, but this isn't 2009 where Sidney Crosby and Malkin can just absolutely light the league on fire and blow the doors off other teams. It's not that they're not good like that anymore. It's just that the league is finally caught up. The talent level in the league is just as good.
Yeah, I think really the Penguins are going to cap out as a second, maybe third round team, because if they play, say for example they stay in the divisional spot and, maybe Columbus or Carolina knocks down to a wild card, I think playing against Columbus or Carolina is more favorable. Not that they would necessarily guarantee a win. Maybe it's just more favorable because the teams that Pittsburgh tends to be successful against are those blue-collar type teams that aren't as structured as, say, the New York Islanders are under Barry Trotz, which I get is an extreme example because Barry Trotz probably plays the most structured,
the most rigid structure. I mean, like you said, they have a really hard time with structured teams like that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
No, you're good. But they tend to be successful against teams like the Blue Jackets, who play a very blue-collar, structured game under John Tortorella, but maybe they're not as hard to play against. They have a couple more skilly kind of smaller guys.
Well, also they don't have the firepower to go out there and they don't have a guy like Ovechkin or the Islanders have Barzal. They don't have these guys that are going to go out there and
right. So I can see a couple of favorable matchups, but I mean most of it's just.
I mean Carolina. I still think Carolina would beat them in a series.
I think so too. I think it's a better matchup, but I think they'd still beat them.
Yeah, I think Carolina, they give Carolina a hard time just because Carolina is a little more, the way they play is a little more chaotic. Not chaotic, it's not as structured, and they just want to go, right? They're just looking to go, which is what cost them against the Bruins last year, was that the Bruins managed to find a way to slow them down. But, I mean, it comes down to the fact that, they're also a young team. When things go crazy, it gets a little hectic in their end, and their goaltending isn't really particularly great. Yeah. I mean, Peter Mrazek's been good for them, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you Peter Mrazek's going to outduel Matt Murray or Tristan Jarry after Tristan Jarry's been playing absolutely out of his mind this year.
No, absolutely not. So, yeah, I think we're pretty much more or less in agreement that we can see why this trade was made, but maybe I don't think it really puts them where they want to be.
Yeah, it's not going to put them over the top. If you would have told me they did this for Chris Kreider, I'd be like, okay, all right, this might do it. They might be way more competitive with this. And this isn't me hyping up Chris Kreider. I'm not sitting here as a Ranger fan being like, oh, Chris Kreider's the best. But it's Chris Kreider is just a bigger, faster version of Jason Zucker who's got a better scoring touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so there's a little more oomph to that game where you're okay, you put Chris Kreider with Sidney Crosby on, and it's
yeah.
Okay.
And that's a discussion that we're definitely going to have next week about the trade deadline. Little sneak peek next week. We're going to hit the trade deadline hard, and we're just going to talk about everything.
I'm so excited.
For this week, let's piggyback off this a little bit and let's talk some big injuries because, like you mentioned, there's one very big injury right now.
Probably the biggest injury.
Connor McDavid for the Edmonton Oilers goes down 2 to 3 weeks with a quad injury. Now they won their game the other night against the Chicago Blackhawks 5-3, so their scoring didn't have any issues, but. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, no offense to Chicago, but they're perhaps not the most talented team in the league. They're not exactly
It's also
Stanley Cup contenders, but yeah, it's one of those things where obviously losing Connor McDavid is never a good thing. Yeah, so obviously losing Connor McDavid, never a good thing.
No.
They win their first game against the Blackhawks, so that helps. But let's talk. I mean, if you're Ken Holland, what are you doing? Is this change the way you approach the trade deadline? Are you making a move? I mean, because right now the Edmonton Oilers sit second in the Pacific Division, but they are only 3 points from not being a playoff team.
I mean, there's nothing you can do to replace Connor McDavid.
No,
There is
absolutely.
literally nothing you can do to replace Connor McDavid. So, and to your point, the fact that they won their first game against Chicago, I mean, yeah, it's good, but I don't think that represents an overall trend. Whereas I think that's going to be a blip on the radar. Whereas more or less, you're going to see a significant decrease in their scoring when Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl aren't on the ice. I mean, Draisaitl's good, and he might be able to win them some games on his own, but the reality is he's not Connor McDavid.
No.
Connor McDavid can single-handedly win games and do it fairly consistently. So, I think if you're Ken Holland, I really didn't know what the Edmonton Oilers' plans were at the deadline anyway. I wasn't sure if they were going to try and if they were going to be a buyer anyway, because to be honest, I don't think Ken Holland necessarily has a really, not that he doesn't have a good grip, but I think he wanted to see what his roster could do before he made any big moves, because it is his first year of the job. So getting accustomed to a whole new roster, a whole new farm system, everything like that, like all the international prospects, he's really got to familiarize himself with a lot. So I wasn't really too sure if he'd be doing anything big and splashy, like flashy at the deadline, which I mean would make sense. I mean, it's Ken Holland. He's very pragmatic. Ken Holland's very good at his job. Very, very good at his job. And if I think anybody's going to find a way to mitigate the damage of the Connor McDavid injury, it's going to be a guy like Ken Holland. Even if it's just like a little trade to get a guy, to play some wing, so Draisaitl's got somebody else to play with. And then in the long run, it's helpful when McDavid does come back. But, I mean, man, Connor McDavid going down with an injury, I mean, he was leading the league in points still, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and I don't think think there's possibly a worse time to get injured other than maybe in the playoffs itself. Yeah, Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid absolutely disgusting together.
I mean, how many games has he played this year? Now before the injury, I mean, how do you replace 30 goals in 55 games and 81 points?
You don't.
You just don't. This would be like the Oilers losing Wayne Gretzky in the stretch. It's like, all right, well,
and that's
you just can't replace him.
Not a knock on Leon Draisaitl, but if the Oilers in the 80s lose Wayne Gretzky, we're not sitting here saying, oh, but they still have Mark Messier. It's like, he's not Wayne Gretzky.
No, and like...
And it's not, again, that's not a knock. Leon Draisaitl, absolutely probably top 5 player in the National Hockey League, without a doubt.
Right.
But he's just not Connor McDavid.
He's top 5 player in the NHL, but you just lost the number 1 player in the NHL. Bar none, the best hockey player in the league.
And that's not to say that guys don't step up, because, I mean, we've all seen the stat. When Crosby's out of the lineup, Malkin's a point-a-game player. So there's not to say that guys don't step up, but you don't lose Connor McDavid and not feel the impact of that.
No, at all.
Especially at this time of the year, you're hitting, you're getting into games 56 to, he's probably going to miss 8 or 9 games, 56 to 64, 63. Boy, those are some really, really big points, especially in a division that's as tight as the Pacific Division.
And I mean,
like yikes.
Let's take a look at their schedule here. Like, these aren't easy games coming up. They have Tampa Bay, Florida, Carolina, Boston.
By the way, Tampa Bay, Florida, Carolina on the road.
Yeah. Then they come home, play Boston. Then they have a little bit of an easier swing. They have Minnesota, LA, Anaheim, Vegas, and Winnipeg. Those are some not easy games, but it's not, Tampa Bay and Boston. But then after Winnipeg, they go on the road and they have to play Nashville, Dallas, and Chicago again, and that's only in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then if he doesn't come back after that Chicago game, then they have to come home and play Columbus, which again isn't an easy game. So in the next 3 weeks, they have some really tough games that even with Connor McDavid, I wouldn't be 100% certain the Oilers would win. But without Connor McDavid, oh man, I don't know if they can take on Tampa Bay, Florida, Carolina. Just the first 4 games: Tampa Bay, Carolina, Florida, and Boston. Yeah. I don't know if you can take that. Those are some really good teams.
And especially when you consider that the Edmonton Oilers currently sit, like I said, second in the Pacific Division, but they're only 2 points ahead of being a wild card team and only 3 points out of being out of the playoffs. And that's with Connor McDavid. That's 55 games, so that, essentially 64 points of games with Connor McDavid. And so let me ask you this. Do you think that this could possibly knock the Edmonton Oilers out of the playoffs?
I wouldn't be surprised if it did. I'm not going to say anything because I've been betting against the Oilers all year. I'm like, this is it. This is when they're going to, they had that terrible December. I'm like, this is it. This is when they fall out of the picture. And they're still in it. I mean, they're only 1 point, they're only 1 point back of leading the division with a game in hand. But
granted, it's the Pacific Division.
Right, but still.
That's still.
I mean, they were still right there. And I think winning the division for them might have actually been worse because they might have pulled a wild card team they didn't want. But, I mean, and that's to say 2 to 3 weeks. Who knows if he has any setbacks? Like, you never know with these things. Like, it's a quad injury. You really don't know what it is. And if they rush him back and he's not 100% and he gets hurt again, then it's like, oh no, I don't know. I really don't think the Oilers can mitigate this in a way. Like, I don't think they can do enough damage control to manage to mitigate the loss of scoring that they have from Connor McDavid.
And I do want to point out, this is on the opposite leg of what he had surgery on over the offseason. So that's at least a positive. If there's any positive in this at all, it's a positive that's the opposite leg. So, it's never like, now both of his legs are bum legs. But, like, at least he's not re-aggravating that injury that almost ended his career. So that's that's very good news for Edmonton Oilers. But, yeah, I got to be honest with you here. You're looking at an Edmonton Oilers team who, again, you're still featuring guys like Leon Draisaitl, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Kyler Yamamoto has played pretty well for them since being called up again, but it's one of those things where there's a lot of really hard games coming up that they really needed Connor McDavid to be in.
I mean, not for nothing, Connor McDavid has 81 points, right? You take him out of the lineup, and the next highest scoring forward outside of Leon Draisaitl is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins with 41. There's a 40-point drop off. There's literally almost a 50% drop off in scoring.
Yeah, and it's insane, especially, in a division that's as tight as the Pacific. It's both a blessing and a curse because, yeah, sure, okay, you're in the Pacific Division, you're not playing the greatest opponents. I mean, no disrespect to the Vancouver Canucks, Calgary Flames, Knights, or the Arizona Coyotes, who are currently all jockeying for position.
It's kind of just the truth.
I have a lot of respect, like we've gone over time and time again, for what the Canucks and Coyotes are doing, but let's be honest here. You're not playing the Blues, the Avalanche, and the Stars 4 times a year, so it's kind of a blessing. But it's also kind of a curse. And at any given moment, the Arizona Coyotes could go ahead and win 3 or 4 games. And if the Coyotes go on a 4-game win streak, now all of a sudden the Oilers, oh no, now you're in 3rd place. No, oh no, now you're in the wild card. Oh, now you're out of the playoffs. So it's tough, to be in a division. And luckily for them, most of the games upcoming aren't teams that they're playing for a position. I think the only team that we had mentioned that they have upcoming that's going to be in that position in the Pacific is the Vegas Golden Knights, but it's just ouch. It's just ouch.
It's just not. I mean, league leading power play, Connor McDavid. That's not gonna. They can't sustain that without Connor McDavid. They just can't. There's just no way you maintain almost 30%. Like, there's no way you maintain almost a 30% on the power play without Connor McDavid.
No, and it's just, like I said, there's probably 2 times of the year that you don't want to be hurt in. I mean, you don't want to be hurt at any point, but there's probably 2 points in a year where you don't want to be hurt, and between games 55 to like 70, is probably the second worst time to be hurt outside of the playoffs, because that's point getting season.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, games 70 to 82 are also very important, but for teams that are theoretically competitive, generally speaking, by game 70, you'll start locking up playoff spots. You'll start locking up playoff spots in theory between games, 70 to 75. If you're a really competitive team, if you're a Stanley Cup caliber team, you should probably be in the playoffs at that point. But these games are crunch time games, and just boy, I mean that's a tough sell.
And it's not like, I mean, I don't want to be that guy and harp on the same that we've been harping on, but it's not like their goaltending is something to write home about. It's not like they have a Henrik Lundqvist, or I always bring up Henrik Lundqvist, but like it's just a habit. Henrik Lundqvist or Carey Price or primetime Jonathan Quick, somebody that like, all right, well we lost our leading scorer, but like he's gonna win. He can win us a game himself. You know what I mean? Like,
and it's not a team that can fall back on a defensive structure because A, let's be honest here, they don't really have a history of being defensively structured, and then B, like you said, they don't have the goaltending to support a defensively minded game, so they don't have that option. The Edmonton Oilers have to score goals,
and without Connor McDavid, I just don't see how they do it.
It's tough, and another tough injury for a team that's in the thick of it. Seth Jones for the Columbus Blue Jackets goes down. I think he's out
8 to 10 weeks with an ankle injury.
And I mean,
that's tough. For a defenseman specifically, that's a really tough injury.
Probably for, you can make a debate whether or not it's either him or Zach Werenski is their number one defenseman, and we've been, we've been saying that the Blue Jackets are kind of in a tough spot for pretty much the whole season, and they've proven us wrong time and time again. But I mean, for a guy that plays power play, penalty kill, he's out there when they need a goal. He's out there when they're up a goal with 90 seconds to go. He's up there, 4-on-4, 3-on-3 overtime. A guy that plays every possible conceivable minute that they need him to play. And, we've been talking about the downfall of the Columbus Blue Jackets for a long time now. When Korpisalo went down, we all said, oh, that's it, season's over. But, I mean, the
difference is, like, Elvis Merzlikins came in, and he was an unknown quantity, right? We didn't know what we were going to get out of him, and especially in his NHL, like, career up to that point hadn't been particularly, like, exciting. But he came in, and he's been an absolute monster. But, like, I don't know how you replace Seth Jones. I really don't.
And the really, really aggravating part of all of this that's gotta just absolutely put a fork in Columbus's GM, Jarmo Kekalainen's back is, boy, I mean, the market for defensemen right now, every team is in the market for a defenseman.
Right-handed defenseman.
And yeah.
You just lost one of the best in the league.
So now you're jumping into that market, so think about the price you're going to have to pay
for a
right-handed defenseman.
You're going to have to outbid somebody.
And I don't know if Columbus is willing to do that with the roster that they have.
I don't know if Columbus has the pieces to trade for something. I don't know if they can pay that price. Because, sorry, let's be honest. Like, their best prospects are all playing at this point. Like Pierre-Luc Dubois, Texier, Sonny Milano, Werenski to a degree. Like they're Korpisalo. Like they're all on the roster now. And it's like, what are you going to give up to get a guy? And I mean, it's not even like a stopgap. Like, we need a guy that can play. 8 to 10 weeks. That takes you into what? March, April?
Yeah, this is you essentially you're yourself into the first season-ending injury. Almost.
Yeah, if they don't make the playoffs, it's over. But if they someone make the playoffs, he can come back maybe in the first round.
Game 7 of the first round, like.
So, and an ankle injury is just so tough for a defenseman,
especially a skating defenseman.
Right, and I mean it's probably something like a high ankle sprain, something that they can't operate on because like an operation, 4 to 6 weeks, you can rehab it, but like a high ankle sprain or like some sort of ligament damage that they have to just wait on, that's just the worst because there's literally nothing they can do. Like he is stuck on this timeline, and it's like.
So let me ask you this: you're Jarmo Kekalainen. Are you trying to fix this via trade, or are you just looking at John Tortorella and saying, you've gotten every possible drop you can get out of this roster. I need you to find a little bit more because we just have to ride the team we have.
I think it's the latter. Because, I mean, Jarmo Kekalainen showed last year that he went all in. I mean, Duchesne, Dzingel,
not trading away Bobrovsky or Panarin.
Yeah, he wanted it. He was going for it. So it's like, all right. But the difference is he had already had a roster that had Dubois, Panarin, Bobrovsky, Jones, or like that's a roster you look at, you're like, okay, this is a playoff team. Like, this is 100% a playoff team. But this year, especially with how tough and competitive that Metro is and the Eastern Conference is in general, I think I just look at John Tortorella and say, listen, man, like, that market is so saturated. I can try and get you something, but I really don't know if I can. So we might just have to try to find a way to, like, just do the best we can with what we have. And if we don't make the playoffs, I mean, that's not a bad season because nobody's expecting us to get this far. So, and if you manage to get us into the playoffs, then, like, I mean, great job. But, like, I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to fire you if you don't because, like, let's be honest, we got this far with a Ross that's kind of just, you know, a shell of its former self.
Yeah, and it's not a knock on the Blue Jackets roster. Obviously, they still have a lot of really good core pieces. You know, Nick Foligno, Seth Jones, Zach Werenski, Korpisalo's proven that he's the real deal. Now Elvis Merzlikins is proving that, at least for this year, he can do it. Well, hopefully, you know, not that I'm rooting against him, but you got to temper your expectations with one-year goaltenders.
Well, I mean, we all remember the Hamburglar. So.
Right, right. So there are core pieces to build around, but I think, yeah, if I'm Jarmo Kekalainen, I'm looking realistically at this roster and saying, look, you know, towards most of this roster is going to be golden for the next 3 years. I would say almost all of it. The only guy that's a little older is Nick Foligno, but he's still not that old. I think he's only now like 30 years old. So I'm looking at Torts and saying, look, we've got absolutely hammered by injuries this year. Korpisalo went down. Now Seth Jones is going down. Look, let's just ride it out. We'll see what happens. Obviously, every GM wants to make the playoffs, but I'm not going to mortgage my future for another second-round exit. And this is a core roster that can play together for the next 3 to 5 years. Let's just take it into next year.
You also,
especially, sorry not to go, but especially with how many, like every single playoff team is looking for a right-handed defenseman.
Even non-playoff teams looking for right-handed defensemen. I mean, like, that was the Rangers' biggest thing on the wish list, and they got Jacob Trouba. So, and there's not many on the market. They don't hit the market very often. Right-handed defensemen are so coveted in the NHL. And the other thing is, like, I don't remember what I was going to say. Talking about Columbus.
Going to next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shame in taking it next year. Like, there really isn't. Like, it's not, you're not tucking your tail and running. It's just, like, realistically. Oh, I remember what I was saying. You don't want to take this. You don't want to make the playoffs and then have to rush Seth Jones back. You want this injury fixed and rehabbed all the way, because you don't want a 75% Seth Jones at any point. You want 100% Seth Jones. And I mean, 75% Seth Jones is still probably a phenomenal ice hockey player. Probably still one of the best in the league. But you'd rather have 100, like just Seth Jones at 100%, because Seth Jones at 100% helped sweep the 62-win Tampa Bay Lightning last year. And he was absolutely instrumental in that. So that's how good he can be. And that's how good you need him to be, especially on a roster that's kind of weaker than some of the teams they're going to run into in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where Seth Jones is going to be a piece on this team, in theory, for the next, 8 to 10 years. And let's, not to bag on a guy that's, had his fair share of controversy, but let's look at what happened when Erik Karlsson, for years in Ottawa, when they were trying to make the playoffs, was rushed back for leg injury after leg injury. Rush him back, get him back on the ice, and then he had to basically reconstruct his whole leg, and now he's not nearly, he's still a phenomenal skater, top 10 skater in the NHL, but he's not the Erik Karlsson skater that he was, because for years he was rushed back as soon as you can get back, get him in the lineup, and it's hurting his skating now.
I mean, he had to change the entire way he played the game, based entirely on the fact that, like you said, he had to have his entire foot pretty much rebuilt last summer. So, do you want to do that to Seth Jones? Not really.
I mean, he's going to be a piece that's on your team for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. And especially on a team that really, if they make the playoffs, they're going to get, maybe 1 or 2 rounds and get knocked out. Whereas, even that Ottawa team doing it to Erik Karlsson was the same situation. So it's like, I don't know. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it.
Right.
It's just not worth it. And it's also just not worth paying the price you're going to have to pay on the market for a right-handed defenseman. It's just not. I mean, it doesn't have to be a right-handed defenseman. You can get a rental. You know, you can get a left-handed guy, anybody that can play that side, but it's just not worth the price you're going to have to pay for a rental at the deadline to maybe not make the playoffs.
Yeah. So tough times in Columbus, and there's another. Let's just real quick. I want to talk about Nazem Kadri for the Avalanche before we kind of start to wrap things up. Nazem Kadri for the Avalanche out 4 to 6 weeks with a lower body injury. Actually, before we get into Nazem Kadri, let's just really quick touch on Shea Weber for the Canadiens. Out indefinitely.
They actually gave him a timetable today. It is another 8 to 10 week injury.
Yeah, so his season's over. And the rumor, unconfirmed rumors, was that this might be potentially career threatening based on previous experience. So, you know, is this now a time? Are we going to see the Canadiens sell? Is this kind of...
Oh, I lied. 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, so 4 to 6 weeks for Shea Weber. But yeah, Shea Weber in the middle of a Norris-type season goes down with an injury. The Canadiens sit...
well out of a playoff spot.
8 points out of a playoff spot. Is this now sell?
It has to be, right? It has to be for Marc Bergevin. Because you're already, like you said, 6-8 points out? Like, you're already sitting so far out of the picture. The teams in front of you are still winning. It's just not there, man.
Yeah.
And this is like we talked about last week on here. We talked about Montreal in general. Like, they don't do anything particularly well. They're kind of average. Yeah. They're either mediocre or below average at everything on the ice. Like, literally everything. Power play, penalty kill, shots for, shots against, expected goals for, expected goals against, expected save percentage. They're literally middle of the road or worse in every single category. And now you lose Shea Weber. So that's only going to get worse. And, I mean, that's your captain. Shea Weber is for such a big, tough guy, he's had so many injuries since coming to Montreal. Like, he's
missed 80 games over the last 2 seasons.
He didn't, I think at one point, he missed like an entire season almost. Like, he missed like 60 games.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
I tend to agree. I think that this is kind of the death knell for this season. I think we're going to be sell at the deadline and kind of, you know, it's tough. You just now get Jonathan Drouin back, and now Shea Weber, who in the middle of a lot of people saying is in Norris contention, now he's out for basically the rest of the season.
I mean, he was a leading goal scorer, so. And also, real quick, I just want to touch on this. If you're Marc Bergevin, do you regret the PK Subban for Shea Weber trade to this point?
I think so, only because I never really saw Shea Weber as much of a fit for the kind of game that the Habs played. I mean, we talked about it last week where the Habs for a long time, they love their undersized forwards, but let's be honest here, the Canadiens have never been, you know, at least in the Carey Price era, have never really been the pretty team. You know, they never had the elite left wing sniper coming off the wall for the one-timer.
Which is funny considering their history where that was literally the team. I mean, you have those 70s Canadian teams, like they were called the Flying Frenchmen, right? So, but now you get, like you said, in the Carey Price era, these teams are kind of like not...
Yeah, you get your Brendan Gallaghers, your Brian Giunta,
your Max
Pacioretty, the power forward, grind it out. And I think PK Subban, especially as a guy that loves to shoot, he brings a little bit of extra offensive flair. I think you need that on a team that's kind of mediocre as far as offensive talent goes up front. Not to knock anybody on the Montreal Canadiens, but you know, there's nothing wrong with playing dirty, grindy hockey. But I think PK Subban brought a little bit of extra flair, and especially with a guy like Brendan Gallagher, who all he does is go to the net. You need a guy to put the puck on net, and I never really saw Shea Weber as much of a fit for the scheme that the Canadiens played.
I never saw Shea Weber as much of a fit just because PK Subban in his prime between Montreal and Nashville facilitated offense. He was the focal point. You got him the puck and he did everything with it. Shea Weber's not that guy. Shea Weber doesn't facilitate offense. He doesn't drive play. Shea Weber is the end point of a play. You get the puck to Shea Weber to shoot the puck, and that's the end of the play. So he doesn't drive play in the same way PK Subban did. And the thing with PK Subban is, like, now that they lost him, they don't really have that guy to drive offense.
Yeah, I mean, Victor Mete has shown flashes, but the weird thing to me about the whole situation was Shea Weber's a guy you bring in, changes the complexion of your defensive core. Now you're a defensively minded defensive core.
But they never got any other guys to play in that mold.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going with it, is they didn't bring in, if you're going to have a defensively minded defensive core, like let's talk about the Nashville Predators for years with Shea Weber. Shea Weber and Ryan Ellis were big, heavy, strong
Ryan
defensive
Suter
cores.
was there too with him. Like that was
the St. Louis Blues from last year. Perfect example. Alex Pietrangelo, Joel Edmondson, even Jay Bouwmeester.
Colton Parayko.
Hard guys to play against. But the complement to that was the forward core. Ryan O'Reilly's a very good defensive forward. Jaden Schwartz is underrated on defense. Patrick Maroon was that grindy, hard guy to play against. The Montreal Canadiens bring in Shea Weber, change the complexion of the defensive core. Now we're a defensively minded defensive core, but let's be honest here. None of their forwards were ever going to be Selke Trophy players.
No.
And it seemed like such a weird, Band-Aid, maybe because we don't score as much, let's go super defensive, but you never actually fully committed to that, so it's like...
It's a weird, albatross in the lineup. And then especially with adding to the decor they already had. You take Subban, right, and take him out. But then you add him to a team that had Jeff Petrie and Victor Mete, and I really don't even know who else. I mean, Nathan Beaulieu was playing there at one point. And then this offseason you add Ben Sherratt, who's a little more defensive, a little more in that, Shea Weber mold. But
probably too little too late.
Yeah, but like you said, definitely too little too late. But it's like you said, they never added, their bottom six never really complemented that way. Yeah, is Philip Deneau a decent two-way forward? Yeah, of course. Is Brendan Gallagher a decent two-way forward? Yeah. But there's no you said, there's no standout commitment to the defense, because they still want to push the play and be like an offensive skating team. But it's not that you can't do that, but Shea Weber wasn't the fit for that. PK Subban might have been the perfect fit for that, because like we were saying, he drove that offense because he was a skating, mobile defenseman. Shea Weber's not exactly the fastest guy on the ice. No one's going to mistake him for Erik Karlsson.
It was weird because for the longest time, the struggle for the Canadiens in the playoffs, when they made the playoffs, was they couldn't score. They couldn't score those goals. They had a lack of offense up front. So their solution to that was to bring in Shea Weber. And to me, it kind of seems like if your car's battery is dead, you put more gas in the tank thinking it's going to fix something, You solved an issue you didn't have. The Canadiens' issue was never, we can't stop the puck. They had Carey Price, okay? And you had a pretty good defensive core. PK Subban, Andrei Markov, till the end of his career, was still there.
Jeff Petrie was there.
Jeff Petrie was still there. You solved an issue you didn't have. That's like the Islanders right now trading for, granted, Casey Cizikas just got hurt and he's out for at least 2 to 3 weeks. But that's like the New York Islanders, whose biggest struggle is offense, and we trade for a goaltender, Brendan Dillon. Who, granted, I've been saying the Islanders need a top 4 defenseman, so maybe that's not the best example, but yeah, it's like the Islanders trading for a goaltender. It's like, oh, we need a top 6 scoring winger. I'll take Jonathan Bernier. It's like we solved an issue we didn't have.
It's like if anything, you made more issues for yourself.
And I think that's exactly what the Canadiens did, because now all of a sudden now we can't stop the puck because our forwards aren't defensive enough, and now we still can't score. We still can't score goals.
The other thing is, it's like adding Shea Weber, just that contract they had to eat for the shit, the $10 million a year or whatever that stupid contract is, with all the performance incentives and signing bonuses. Granted, the Montreal Canadiens don't care about money. They're one of the wealthiest teams in the league.
Yeah, they
it's like they can just throw money at teams. The salary cap exists because the New York Rangers, Toronto Maple Leafs, and Montreal Canadiens. It's a widely known fact that those 3 teams, you just throw money at players. They used to front load contracts and be paying guys $16 million a year.
Because they didn't care.
Yeah, because their budget was $100 million. They didn't care. But you eat that, and that significantly hampers your ability to do anything, because you're no matter what you do, that's gonna push you so close to the cap. Because granted, the cap's $80 million or whatever.
81.5 right now, I think.
I mean, that's an eighth of your cap. 1/8 of your cap is taken up in a single player.
Well, it's like we were talking about with Roberto Luongo, is his contract made it significantly harder for Vancouver to rebuild. And that's the fear I have, if I'm looking at this Canadiens team, where we've been saying for the last probably 2 or 3 years now, okay, maybe it's time to start tearing it down. it's so hard to do that with a contract like that because that significantly delays your rebuild.
It's also like, what are you going to do when Nick Suzuki needs his real money?
Where's that money coming from?
Right. Or Nick Suzuki or any of those guys, any of those young players that they've drafted. Victor Mete, what happens if he, blossoms into a Norris Trophy defenseman and now you have to pay him? The other issue is it's just like, I don't know. It just really didn't make sense. Yeah, did they add a absolute cannon from the point? The guy's shooting like 109 miles an hour or something stupid? Yeah, of course, but that doesn't really solve any other issues they have.
No, I 100% agree.
And it's like if they would have started this process like 2-3 years ago, it could have been a really, really gentle rebuild where you really wouldn't have had that many years of bad hockey. It would have looked a lot like it does now. They probably would have been pretty mediocre, but by right about now, they'd be looking good. They'd probably be moving in a direction where you're like, oh, okay.
On the upswing.
You're like, the Canadians are getting good, and then Carey Price is a team in front of them. I mean, granted, the PK Subban contract also wasn't very good, but...
At least he was young enough to the point where you're like, okay, I can see where this is going.
It's also just Shea Weber himself. Like, adding Shea Weber at however old he was when they got there, like 34, 35 or whatever it was, or 32, whatever. It's just like, why? Why keep adding older pieces to a roster that's kind of in a spot where you need to get a little younger? You could have retooled this on the fly, added some younger guys, and now you'd be sitting pretty, ready to compete in the Atlantic Division. If anything, you've pushed yourself further out of contention in the Atlantic Division, and it's not going to get any easier in the next couple of years to make the playoffs there because Florida's getting good. If Bobrovsky manages to regain his form at any point and get consistent over the next couple of years, Florida's looking like an absolute playoff team, like 100% playoff team. We all know about Tampa Bay, we all know about the Boston Bruins, and we all know about the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if Buffalo ever manages to get their shit together, like, that's another team that you're going to be competing with 5 teams to make the playoffs, and only 8 teams make it.
Yeah, and it was just a weird trade at the time, too, when you take into consideration that really that seemed to be a trade. You trade for a 30-year-old Shea Weber with term when you're thinking, okay, we're Stanley Cup competitive for the next 5 years. After that, we'll suck it up. We'll deal with the bad contract. But if we get a cup out of it, it's worth it.
They weren't even in that position.
At the time, they weren't at a position to win the Stanley Cup. No. It's just one of those things where it just didn't make a lot of sense. It made a ton of sense for Nashville. They got the really good end of the deal out of it.
I mean, they almost won a Stanley Cup out of it.
But no. If I'm going back, I'm not making that trade. I wasn't making that trade at the time.
No,
I'm not making it now.
I'd make it even. I'd stay even further from it now.
So that's it for Shea Weber. And last guy we're going to kind of hit on here before we wrap it up today. Nazem Kadri with the Colorado Avalanche out 4 to 6 weeks with a lower body injury. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because this, to me, is a very interesting injury. Because the knock on Colorado last year heading into the playoffs was, okay, they're super talented, super fast. Where they had the Toronto Maple Leafs problem, where's the bite? Where's the snarl? They don't have a second-line center. Kadri fixed pretty much every one of those issues. Comes in, second-line center, who can play that fast, aggressive style of hockey because he played it with the Leafs for years. But he also he rounded out his game in Toronto towards the end with Mike Babcock. He brings a bite. He brings a little bit of edge. He's a physical player. He's hard to play against.
He's also a 30-goal scorer.
Yeah, and I think, it's one of those questions where, and the question I'm going to pose to you is, he's out 4 to 6 weeks, so he should be back in time for playoffs. But let's say this injury is nagging him and he's not 100%. Does this change your opinion of the Colorado Avalanche being Stanley Cup contenders? Because now we're looking at a similar roster to last year where the big question was, where's the bite?
I think so. I mean, it makes them it turns them back into a glass cannon, right? Like that top line, and then that's it. Because who you're going to have play with Burakovsky now? You're going to slot in Tyson Jost? Tyson Jost is the one that's still there because they traded Alex Kerfoot. You're going to slot Tyson Jost in that number 2 spot. And that's not a knock on Tyson Jost. I think he's a good hockey player, but it's like he's ideally like a number 3 guy. He can slide up in the lineup when he has to, which he's going to have to now because you lose Nazem Kadri. But, I mean, Kadri also had over 20 goals. He was on pace for 30. He was on pace for like 60-something points. I mean, he was having a great year for them. And like you said, he was also it hurts their penalty kill. It hurts them in their defensive zone, and it takes that element out of their game, that X factor. You said that bite and that snarl that like they didn't have, and now they don't have again. And like, is Nazem Kadri a little bit of a head case? Yeah. I mean, like, did he try to kill Jake DeBrusk last year after getting kneed? Yeah. I mean, but it takes that physicality and that snarl out. I mean, do they still have Gabriel Landeskog who likes to play with that physical edge? Yeah, but you don't want Gabriel Landeskog playing like that because you don't want him getting hurt. You can't afford to lose him again to injury like they already did this year. I mean, it puts them in a similar situation that they had with. This is a real throwback, but with Forsberg. Peter Forsberg. Yeah, Peter Forsberg did a similar thing. Like, he was in a similar situation as Gabriel Landeskog, and that team also towards the end of his time in Colorado. Originally, they had a lot of bite, but like they didn't really have a lot of bite. So he tried to prove. He was trying to prove how tough he was, essentially. But like, he would play with a physical edge, and he kept getting hurt, and it eventually hampered his career. There was a foot injury that essentially ended his career. And that's the risk you run with Gabriel Landeskog here. Is like, now you push Gabriel Landeskog into that situation where he has to be the physical forward and bring that element, which is fine. He can play physical. He wants to play physical. He's a power forward, but you don't want him getting hurt. You don't want to run the risk of him going in there and separating his shoulder, throwing a big hit, run there, blow his knee up on accident, trying to throw a big hit. Like, there's a lot that can go wrong, and at this time of the year, you can't afford to lose him. It's not October. We're in February now. Like, this is the stretch. This is the stretch run. I mean, we're 2 weeks from trade deadline, and we're essentially like 6 weeks out from playoffs. Like, you cannot afford to lose these guys like this.
Yeah.
I mean, and honestly, they couldn't afford to lose Nazem Kadri like this. They're in a really tight race in that Central Division. I mean, not necessarily tight. I mean, they're not really that close to the St. Louis Blues, but between them and Dallas, there's a real race on here. I mean, they're 1 point back on St. Louis, 3 points up on Dallas, and that's kind of it. Like, there's only those three teams in the Central really fighting it out, but you can't afford to lose these games and somehow manage to let Winnipeg get into a division and get pushed into a wild card. I mean, not that I'd be worried about them crossing over into the other division. I mean, they'd crush whoever they played. I really wouldn't be worried.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I'm not afraid for the Colorado Avalanche as far as making the playoffs, and
once they get there is kind of the issue.
Yeah, and I'm not even really afraid about them getting out of the first round should they have crossed over. But I mean, if they're playing in that Central Division, which looks like the kind of spot that they're going to be in, I mean, the thing is, like I said, the reason I didn't believe in them last year to make it out of the first round against the Flames was I looked at them and I said exactly what you're saying. Is they're a one-line team. I said the Flames are going to be a hard, fast, physical team that are going to shut them down. Granted, they made the Flames look like idiots. They turned them into silly putty in, I think, 5 games. But, yeah, it just really, but that's not the goal. This Colorado Avalanche team is in a spot where the goal should be to win the Stanley Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And Nazem Kadri, even outside of his offense, brings a lot of X factors. He rides the line. Let's be honest here. He rides the line of what is acceptable. But every team, like we've discussed, needs a guy like that. And it really makes me worry that, what's his replacement? Because if you're replacing Nazem Kadri with yet another scoring, fast, speedy center, now you're just the team from last year. And I don't think it knocks them totally out of Stanley Cup contention, but I definitely think it puts them on the outside.
It takes them from that, like we were saying earlier, like with Toronto, it takes them from that sure shot, they are a Stanley Cup caliber team, to the maybe category. We're like, all right, they have a shot at it, but like, I really don't see the path being that easy for them to get there. There's going to be a lot of like really tough series. And let's say he gets back in time for playoffs. Like you said, he's really not going to be in that good a shape. Not that he's not in good shape, but he's not going to be in game shape. He's been out 6 weeks. He's going to take a little bit of time to get back up to game speed, and now is not the time of the year to be playing warm-up games. It's not.
And it was called a lower body injury, so we can really only speculate what it is. But if it's his legs, he's not going to be able to skate. He's going to have to take some games to get his legs back underneath him, and it's just even if he's only out for 4 weeks, and he's back in time to get some warm-up games for playoffs, it makes me kind of question where he plays a lot of minutes for this team, and he plays a lot of important minutes for this team. And it's tough because theoretically, the Colorado Avalanche should be sure shot Stanley Cup contenders, but when you lose a guy that's as important as Nazem Kadri, it's tough because now how do you match up against the Blues? Now how do you match up against the Stars? Like you said, who's going to be physical on this team for you? And it's just...
I mean, it's just outside of all of that. I mean, they're going to make the playoffs, but now, you're going to make the playoffs, but now you're looking for home ice. You're jockeying for position with those teams. You don't want to start on the road. And just if this ends up being catastrophic, but for them somehow, they still end up in the playoffs, they're gonna have to go into Dallas and play Dallas. That's gonna be tough. A lot of people don't expect, for some reason, Dallas. They don't think Dallas is a good market. Dallas is loud. Dallas loves their team, and that is a good hockey team. You're staring down Ben Bishop, Jamie Benn, Tyler Seguin, Radulov, Heiskanen, Klingberg. I mean, Joe Pavelski.
Roman Polak's tough out there now.
Joe Pavelski's on that team. That's a lot of playoff experience And Colorado doesn't really have a lot of playoff experience on this roster. This is a pretty young, inexperienced team. So, I mean, for what it's worth, Kadri hasn't played that many playoff games, but he's got a significantly higher, count than a lot of the guys on this roster. So, he brings, like you said, he rides that line. He brings some leadership qualities, and he brings that playoff experience. He doesn't necessarily know how to win in the playoffs. He hasn't won the Stanley Cup or anything, but he knows how to get there, and he knows what it takes to win because he's seen it. And he's played with guys who've been there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of those situations where you really have to look at it and say, wow, what do we do? And Kadri brings a lot of intangibles to a roster that really needs it. Because to me, for last year, they kind of look like the Tampa Bay West, where I was like, okay, you can score, but now what? And especially with the Avalanche having, a younger, more playoff inexperienced goaltender with Philip Grubauer, you really need those centers to really kind of clear out the front of the net, let him see the puck, and it really makes me wonder where it's like, we all know Nathan MacKinnon's fast, we all know that, he can steal the puck and go the other way, but sometimes he gets, out positioned in front of the net because he's not a small guy by any stretch of the imagination, he's a strong guy, but, defense isn't exactly what Nathan MacKinnon's known for, whereas Kadri, he'll throw that big hit in front of the net. He'll give you a couple cross checks in the back, wear you down over a 7-game series, and you might think twice about going to the net. Where if he's out long term, and especially in the Western Conference, where, let's be honest here, if he comes back and he's not 100%, he's going to be taking big hits against either the Blues or the Avalanche. He's going to be taking hits from Alex Pietrangelo, Ryan O'Reilly, out in Dallas, he's going to be taking hits from Jamie Benn, Roman Polak, even John Klingberg's a bigger guy. He's going to be taking these hits, and it's like, if he's not 100%, can he be, physically engaged for 7 games?
Is he going to be effective? And the other thing is, it really sucks the wind out of their sail because they're in a position right now with a game in hand and 1 point back of St. Louis. They're in a position to win this division. And I really think this puts a damper on it. I don't think this puts a significant damper on it. I think Colorado could still win this division with the roster. I mean, it's not a knock at St. Louis or anything. This Colorado team is just so good. But it realistically puts a damper on their ability, their chances of winning this division. Because St. Louis is just so good. You can't afford to go on any you can't afford to lose 2-3 games at a time at this point in the season. Especially not when you're trying to keep home ice in the first round.
No, especially because, like you pointed out, either of these teams that you're going to play against is hard teams to play against. Like Dallas, 2 of the top 10 selling jerseys in the NHL for last year and this year are Dallas Stars jerseys, Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin. They've been in the top 10 for the last 2 years. So they love their team. We all know how much St. Louis loves their team. You don't want to be on the road. And yeah, I mean, you never want to lose a second-line center, period. Every team doesn't want to lose a second-line center. But let's be honest here. If certain teams lose second-line centers, it's really not that big of a deal. If, the New York Islanders lost Brock Nelson, we have a lot of guys that play very similar to Brock Nelson. If the, Toronto Maple Leafs lose a guy like, John Tavares, oh no, we lost John Tavares. You still have Austin Matthews. You lose a guy like Nazem Kadri, there's really not a lot of players that play like Nazem Kadri on the roster.
I mean, I think Colorado there is a more commitment to they did sign Pierre, they started Belmar, so there's a more of a commitment to being a little more physical, but Kadri's the biggest one. I mean, Kadri's probably the most physical player on that roster.
Well, they went out of their way because for the longest time, the knock was we don't have a second-line center. They went out of their way to get Kadri.
Yeah.
So that shows you how important he is to them.
I mean, honestly, replacing a second-line center is harder to do, which isn't stupid. They're harder to find and harder to replace than some top-line centers. I mean, because when you lose your top-line center, you know you're not going to replace him. You're like, all right, well, we just have to figure out a way to fill that spot until he comes back. Like, losing Connor McDavid, you're like, we can't replace Connor McDavid. There's no way we can replace Connor McDavid.
No.
Losing Mika Zibanejad, there's no way the Rangers can replace Mika Zibanejad. They just can't. But, like, and losing a second, so that you don't even try. But losing a second-line center puts you even in a weirder spot because you're like, do we try to replace him? Like, do we try to put somebody in that spot that we can slide down in the lineup when he comes back? Or do we just wait? Because it's like, all right, you have a guy that plays, Tyson Joe's playing number 3. He moves into the number 2 hole. He's going to do an okay job of it. But, like, what do you do? It really puts you in a hard spot, especially with the deadline coming up.
Yeah, and we're not trying to be all, like, doom and gloom like it's over for the Avalanche. Like, we both understand that they're still a very good team. And they're, it's just one of those things where I think it takes them from that, I'd be willing to place money on them winning the Stanley Cup to, maybe they're on the bubble now.
The real thing, what it does is it just changes the complexion of the team, and it makes them, like I said, it makes them more of a glass cannon again, where they'd gone through so much effort to make sure they weren't a glass cannon anymore. They went out and got Nazem Kadri, Belmar, Burakovsky. They made a point of being like, we have a second line now. And then Kadri goes down with an injury, and it's just unfortunate. It's just really unlucky for them, honestly.
At a very bad time of year.
If this was like October, it'd be like, all right, well, I mean, they still have a whole season. It's like, you don't have that much.
Time.
Yeah, you got to get in there and you got to win these games.
So that's kind of where we're at there with Nazem Kadri. Before we wrap up, is there anything last minute you want to kind of hit on?
Not particularly.
All right, so, again, one last thing before we head out. There was reports that Bobby Ryan had returned to the ice for the Ottawa Senators, so we're glad to hear that, whatever program he's going through is working. He's getting back on the ice, which is always good to hear. Very good to hear that, he entered the program, and it seems to be putting him on a positive track as far as that goes. And then, of course, again, with the Jay Bouwmeester situation, we hope to keep only hearing positive feedback as far as his status goes. But next week is going to be a really fun week. We're going to hit the trade deadline as hard as we possibly can. We're going to be saying, which teams are buyers and sellers, who's going where, who should be traded, mock trades. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be like...
TSN Trade Center, watch out.
Yeah,
we're coming
it's going to be the Light and the Lamp Trade Center. And then, of course, the week after that, in the middle of the week, is the trade deadline.
So we'll probably do a trade deadline wrap-up of some kind.
Right, we'll probably do a post-trade deadline, seeing wherever all the chips have landed. But next week's going to be really fun, so be sure to tune in next week for that, and we will see you guys next time.